So we're going to begin first with some songs to start up the morning. After that, we'll start with our lineup of speakers. So here we have Suscol Intertribal Council blessing us today with some indigenous songs.
I'm Charlie Salita, Director of Suscol Intertribal, and I wanted to talk about how our elders talk about water. And this is kind of a picture up here of the watershed of Napa, which actually comes from Lake County. Most people don't realize their headwaters are up in Lake County. It flows down through Poudre Creek into the Napa River. But the headwater is where the water's born. It's like the head, it's the brain. And then the trees and the mountain ridges are the heart and the lungs. And the heart, the trees are what calls the rain from the sky. The roots of the trees hold the water so the aquifers can replenish. And then the feet is where the rivers meet the ocean. So if we were taking in this body, if the brain was running out of water, our elders told us about 15 years ago that about 5 of the headwaters of California are going seasonally dry. So that means the brain is starting to die. And this was 12, 15 years ago. I've been trying to get legislators to know about this and to address it, but it obviously is going to take more people. But we have a handful of people here, and a handful is a very powerful group if everybody's dedicated to realize that if the legislators don't lead, then the people must lead. If we took blood and said, well, this arm doesn't really need blood, we'll put all that blood over to this arm. Well, this arm would start to have gangrene. The feet, if the water isn't reaching the sea, the feet would be like gangrenous feet. Eventually, the whole body dies. If you have the head starting to atrophy, the feet not quite reaching the ocean, and then moving through dams and diversion all the water to other parts where the water didn't used to go, you have a very sick body. And that sick body is the state of California. Our water situation it's not a drought, it's a crisis. The legislators in Sacramento don't want the public to know. They're afraid of mass panics, how critical the situation is. So it's up to us to make solutions. So hopefully those of you that stay here will stay here because we want to be brainstorming. We are filming everything today, so everything you say, we're going to have Q&A after every speaker. And that's all going to be recorded. It'll be shown on the local TV station. We'll have it available on YouTube and Vimeo. So you can continue to look at it and share it with people.
All right, thank you, Suscol Intertribal Council, for the welcoming songs. The songs are always a blessing for our water, for all the watersheds, all our human bodies that are mostly water. That's always how we start. This is the Water Symposium that's hosted by Suscol Intertribal Council. So we want to be intentional about always going to the people native to the land that you're in. So that's why we start with the songs that Sal offered, with the clapper stick and the flutes that calls and invokes the memories of thousands of years old of indigenous existence. All right, so without further ado then, we're just going to pass it on to Edward, and we'll go on with the program for today, okay?
Hello, everybody. I'll tell you a little bit about myself first before I start. I'm Pomo from Lake County, Wintu from Northern California, and Wailaki, also from Northern California, up in near Mendocino and Humboldt County. and I'm also Paiute. So they're all tribes from like Northern California and then Northern Nevada. Mostly I associate with the Pomo side of my family because that's where I live. I live in Santa Rosa. That's where the Pomos are. And that's what I focused learning about mostly in my life, is learning about Pomo traditions and Pomo way of life. I'm a fire ecologist, so you may be wondering why I'm here at a water symposium. I'm going to tell you. What I've learned through my journey to learn about traditional Native California culture, what I've learned is the way that the traditional people took care of the land, and the way it was made so abundant. At one time, California was such an abundant place. We think it is now, but a long time ago, it really was. Now, if a Native Californian from the past came into the present and looked at California, they would cry, looking at it and looking to see how neglected it is, and just how, I'm not even talking about pollution or anything like that. I'm talking about the wildlands that we go out and look, you know, on the weekends and go hiking and stuff, and we think it's all so beautiful and amazing. But a California Indian would go, old California Indian would go out into those same lands and just be so sad about how bad it is and how neglected it is. For example, on this picture right here, you know, that's gives you a small dose of what it used to look like. There used to be, like in this part of California, Napa, there would just be rolling hills just covered with flowers this time of year, and abundant and flourishing and wet, lots of water everywhere, even in the times that we would consider now the dry seasons. Back then they weren't as dry as they are now, because they were taking care of it in a way that conserved water and kept the water around a lot. And so there would be, you know, like a wildflower patch like this could go for miles and miles over hillside and over hillside just forever. And there's early accounts of the first Europeans coming here and talking about that. How it would just go on, like it would just be one flower for miles, and then that would slowly ease into another flower, and that would go on for miles and miles. This part is just talking about the diversity of California. Like the red spots there are diversity hot spots of the world. And most of them are along the equator, but there's one little tiny red spot way up there, and guess where that is? California, the California Floristic Province. I'm just going to go through this real fast. Also with tribes, the same thing. There's like most states have, you know, 2 or 3 tribes in it, but then when you get to California, even a populated state like Florida, there's just 2. We get to California, there's hundreds of tribes. So it's not only diverse in plant life and animal life, also in human life. So what do we see when we see this picture? What do you see? Moisture. Yeah, that's good. In our modern days, when we go, everybody knows this is Yosemite, right? When it's just a magnet for humans right now in modern times. Everybody comes from all around the world to see this, and it's described as awesome and beautiful and just so amazing. But then again, like what I said before, you get a native California person from the past coming in, looking at that picture, and they're going to cry. They're going to say, "Oh no, what's going on here? What happened? We took such good care of this for centuries and thousands of years. We took such good care of this valley, and now look at it. It's gone to waste." That's what they would see when they would look at this picture. And also what's happening here is things dry up. These waterfalls dry up. And, you know, not the main ones, you know, not Bridal Veil Falls was what we see here, but during the rainy season, right after the rains, there's waterfalls all over the place in Yosemite coming down these, but not anymore. I mean, now in modern times, it doesn't happen year-round. And so this is what it looked like. This is a painting done at the turn of the 20th century, like 1870s or 1880s. This is what Yosemite looked like when the Europeans first came. And when it would look like this, the streams and the waterfalls ran year-round. And it was lush, and just this, the common language that was used by the early settlers when they came and looked at this was it looked like a park. Everywhere they went to in California, it looked like it was a well-manicured park. And their assumption that it was like God or somebody made it like this, just this perfect environment for humans to come and live in, and they took it as theirs. They say God made this for us, made this beautiful land for us, but that wasn't true. It didn't just happen like that. It was made to be like that by humans. The native people of this area worked for hundreds and thousands of years to make it look like this and to keep it so well balanced that they had water year round, water and everything, and plants and all the things that they needed when they needed it. So again, let's compare that. That's what it looks like now. See, all that area down below, all that area at the bottom of the valley was just all wide open meadows, just full of diversity. All the plants that they needed for for living a healthy life were all there in those valleys along the river and in the meadows. So how did they do that? The way they did that was by burning. The burning was their main tool for taking care of the land. And there's a list of some of the things that burning does when they're doing it right. One of the most important things that it does, that I'm always telling everybody, is that it promotes diversity in every way, in plants and animals and people, and it just promotes diversity. What it does is, like if you burn a big swath of land, it returns that piece of land to baseline, so that all of the plants have an equal chance of surviving. And if you don't burn for a long time, the invasives come in. Like, we have a different view of invasives now in these days. When we think of invasives, we're thinking of plants that are coming in from another country or from another part of the world and coming in and taking over. But that's not really what invasives are. What they are the plants that are the strongest and most vigorous. And we have those plants here too. They don't come from outside. We have those vigorous, strong plants here. So they had to burn here all the time too, just to push those strong, vigorous plants back, to give the weaker, more fragile plants a chance to have some time in the world. So that's what burning does. You know, it creates a baseline so all of these delicate plants could come, and the delicate plants are the important plants a lot of the times. They're the edible plants and the medicinal plants. So that's what burning does. And another thing that burning does, that on the list, is another thing that it helps with, when it pushes away the vitalic type plants and aggressive plants. Those plants take a lot of energy, and they use up a lot of resources. They use up a lot of the minerals in the soil, and they use up a lot of water. So when you're burning, that eliminates that use of water from all of those plants that are so aggressive. And so when there was a constant regimen of burning that was happening in these areas in all of California, it was saving water. So creeks could run, creeks that normally, like in these days, creeks that dry out in August or in September, they would keep going throughout the year because the water wasn't being used up by all of these other plants everywhere. These are just types of burning. Another important aspect of burning on the land is to not burn everything all at once, and just this like clear-cut type burning where you're just burning everything. The proper way to do it is what today is called mosaic type burning, where you're just burning little bits of land here and there. And that way you're stopping, or you're keeping the land healthy, but you're stopping the large catastrophic fires from happening. This is it. This is the mosaic style of burning, and that's where you just take one piece and you burn right there 1 year or one season. Then another in the spring, then in the fall you burn here, and then the following year you burn up there, and then just every piece of that land has a different regimen going on, depending on what's there and what's needed. Because if you burn in one spot, a basket plant, say you want to make baskets, and there's that plant growing here, if you burn there, to get a certain type of basket, or you have two spots where that plant's growing, And you could burn here to make that plant do one thing, and you could burn here to make that plant do another thing. So say like you're burning here twice a year, and you're burning here every 2 years. So that same plant will have a different outcome. And then that whole thing's happening everywhere. All these different things, it's just so complicated, so complicated. It took years and years to figure it all out. And then another important part of it is to leave things too. So you don't want to just eliminate all these wild, thick areas. You have to leave it too, and that's what this slide's about. They're called skips. And that's where you just leave the trees very thick like that, instead of coming in and thinning them out. Because in the other places you would come in and thin out those trees, but then there's also places where you just leave it. And you leave this, with all the duff and fuel down there, you leave that there for wildlife. The key word is diversity. Diversity everywhere. Diversity of plants, diversity of ecosystems. That's what makes strength. Strength comes in diversity. And then have wide open spots some places, dense areas for wildlife. I just want to show you this, and you can see people are really afraid of fire for a lot of reasons, and they have every right to be afraid of fire. But when you're doing it right and using all of this knowledge to back yourself up and how to do it right, it's a really useful tool and not a dangerous tool if you're doing it right. And so that's what this video was going to point out, is how easy and how easy it is to work with and malleable, and you can make it do whatever you want. This is the fire that just happened last year in Santa Rosa. We're sad about all the loss of human property and lives and stuff, but it was good for our dog pain patch. It was waiting for a fire for a long time. So this is it. It's over there by the northern Santa Rosa, where it jumped the freeway. A dogbane is an important plant for traditional California. And this is the things that cause the big fire, all the different things. All those things happen all of the time. Okay, I'm running out of time, so you could just look at that. Those are the things that happened that made the fire happen, and they happen all the time, and they'll continue to happen. And fires will always happen here. They always happen in the same spot. Every 40 years there'll be a fire somewhere. It's like, I call them fire geysers, because you know how geysers are regular, and fires are regular like geysers too, and they just shoot out every 40, every 60 years, and they'll keep doing that. That's it in a quick nutshell.
So if we could give a round of applause again for Edward. There's a lot of knowledge on the relationship with fire, then he's really a steward of that knowledge. Next, and by the way, he will be back with a panel this afternoon, so that's another chance to ask him any other questions, okay? So next up, we have the former Public Utilities Commissioner, Catherine Sandoval, here with us, and Charlie mentioned some of her work briefly, and she has a good scope of the whole headwaters throughout the California and the relationships with water, electricity, etc. So, without further ado, Catherine Sandoval.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Sandoval. I'm a law professor at Santa Clara University, and I would really like to thank my friend and a terrific leader, Charlie Toledo, for this invitation to be here with the Suscol Intertribal Council and Napa Valley College and all of you to discuss this important issue of water and have a community conversation about water. I thought we would begin with a quote from the Yurok tribe in Northern California near the Klamath River. And this is part of their legend about how the world was created. And part of the legend after thunder and the earthquake created the world. They said, now the people have enough to live on. Everything they need is in the water. And this is a picture of the Klamath River, which is part of the Yurok Reservation. A stunningly beautiful area, but as we'll discuss, this is an area where there are still a lot of challenges. Parts of this area, the people still do not have electricity. Imagine that in California. We still have people working to get electricity. And there's a school there that is a state of California school that is still running on diesel generators. all things which contribute to poverty and to hardship, but also contribute to climate change and really affect our watershed in a very negative way. So I thought we would begin this conversation by also starting with, as I was thinking about water and climate change, I was thinking, that we're talking a lot about the causes and consequences of these huge challenges. But maybe the place to start, and I'm glad, Charlie, that we started with welcoming the morning with the traditional drums, and then with also thinking about how the world was created and the centrality of water to the world. But the other place to start is with talking about our values. And I am blessed to be a tenured professor at Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit university in the Silicon Valley. And Santa Clara has adopted, actually, as a university, and its corporation board has also adopted a sustainability mission. And as part of the university's sustainability mission, their mission is to fashion a more humane, just, and sustainable world, reflecting its values as a Jesuit university. And I'd like to humbly suggest that I think what's important about that mission is that it puts at the center of sustainability humanity and a way of behaving with each other as well as with the world. A lot of times environmental policy tends to be focused on what we call the environment, water or air or forest resources, in a siloized way that's divorced from people and from the community and our interaction with resources. But when we think about behaving humanely, it helps to center us with that environment and to help focus us on our values and missions. And so Santa Clara has also recognized that sustainability policy and action must recognize environmental dimensions, social dimensions, and economic dimensions. And the university is committed to environmental stewardship, environmental education, and environmental service. So in fact, Santa Clara University has made a commitment to become an energy carbon neutral university by 2020, right? That's a year and a half from now, 2020. And so, in fact, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day because I am participating in the Sustainability Education Program. I was lucky enough to receive a grant through the Penstem Institute, and we received some training. So the university is looking for ways to achieve that, because if they don't hit carbon neutrality by 2020, which is really soon, then they're going to buy some carbon offset credits. So it's better to actually try to hit carbon neutrality than just buy credits and try to get somebody else to do it. The Yurok actually have some carbon credits available to help preserve that beautiful forest. But it behooves us to also look at options. Like, for example, I was talking to a friend who, one of the products that's available is solar lighting for parking lots, which makes a lot of sense because it stores the energy of the sun during the day and then illuminates at night using both free energy and completely carbon neutral energy. And you could even mix it up with some electric connected energy to make sure that there's power backup in case you had a week of rainy days. So there are a lot of things that we can be thinking about how we reach this goal of carbon neutrality. And I'd like to also offer this as a goal that I know many communities have adopted, sustainability policies, including policies to work towards carbon neutrality. So when we think about why it's important at this time to embrace sustainability goals and why we're facing some of the challenges with water, with energy, with fire, with drought, as we look at climate change and its causes and consequences, the California Air Resources Board has done an inventory as a result of AB 62, looking at major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And so this chart shows some of the sectors that are major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, including, we see the transportation sector. Do I have a, it doesn't look like I have a pointer. The transportation sector is one of the very largest sectors. So as we think about what to do with regard to carbon neutrality, how can we both as individuals and society address climate change? One of the most important things we can do is transportation. Try to use less carbon-intensive transportation, whether that is through electric vehicles, other zero or low-emission vehicles, public transportation, biking, anything that we can do to help to make transportation less carbon dependent is one of the most critical things. And this is also going to require investment in the infrastructure to make sure that people are able to do things like car charging. And I would like to suggest that it's important that that infrastructure investment include not only the cities, and there's been a lot of focus on infrastructure investment in electric vehicle charging in Los Angeles and San Francisco. I actually saw some car charging ports in Sacramento when I was there yesterday. But also making sure that people in the rural areas of California have access to electric vehicle car charging, including on our Native American reservations. We have 109 federally recognized reservations in California, and electric vehicle car charging should be available not just at their businesses, but also to their residents. And if we don't do this, we're never going to be able to actually reach this sector, because as you know, living here in Napa in this beautiful valley where agriculture is a central part of your work here in Napa, as much as California has large cities, we have 3 of the top 10 largest cities in America, Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Jose, which is a larger city than San Francisco. 95% of California's land mass is rural. So if we don't address these issues in rural areas, we can't address these issues. So electrifying transportation, carbon neutrality in transportation is going to be important. And then also we see how much greenhouse gases are contributed from the electric sector and from electric generation. And so this has also been a major focus and was a big focus of our work, continues to be at the California Public Utilities Commission, as well as for all of us as we make individual decisions, whether about lighting, turning on or off the lights, or the type of generation that we use. Agriculture is also a big contributor, as is the industrial sector. So looking at what we can do to help to address these sectors is going to be very important. And I'd also like to suggest this chart really focuses on greenhouse gas emissions. And in addition to greenhouse gas emissions, California has recently recognized that it's important to also deal with short-lived climate pollutants such as diesel and other particulate pollutants. And this is a very big issue, especially in many rural areas of California, including on many Native American reservations. So one of the things that we are seeing now as a result of climate change, there was a recent report that said California is going to be experiencing more precipitation whiplash, which is periods of intense flooding, even catastrophic flooding, alternating with periods of drought. So when I served on the Low-Income Oversight Board with Charlie Toledo, California went through 5 years of drought, as I needn't remind every Californian. And Californians really stepped up. People conserved. People really made huge contributions to cutting back water consumption. But I was just reading last night that one of the things that's happened is since the drought was declared to be officially over and water restrictions are lifted, we've now gone back up to using on average 71 gallons per person per day of water. So one of the recommended goals is 55 gallons per person per day of water. So, you know, as we see the drought conditions have really created great stress to our trees. And then when we had drought alternating by extreme rain and flood, that also led to a lot of fuel and vegetation growth, which sadly has contributed to these catastrophic fires we've seen. So you see on the right the Napa River and what a healthier ecoshed should look like. And then, of course, these catastrophic fires that affected both the more urban and also the rural areas of Napa, Northern California, also terrible fires in Southern California. So we're very concerned that we need to do more to make sure that this is not our future, to have fire in a catastrophic manner and not a controlled manner, as we discussed before, in terms of fire as a way of healthy eco-sheds when properly practiced. So another thing that we see with climate change and its causes and consequences is issues such as the health of the river, the health of the fish, and therefore the health of the people who also depend upon the river fish and the ecosystem. In 2002, the Klamath River experienced a very large fish kill as a result of increases in blue-green algae. And so these were associated with some of the dams on the Klamath River. Some of these dams were built at the turn of the century. There's a proposal that is pending before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to remove 4 of the dams. These dams together produce less than 200 megawatts of electricity. So 200 megawatts, by comparison, there are some solar farms which produce over 300 megawatts of electricity. No one builds a natural gas power plant that produces only 200 megawatts. The standard natural gas power plant produces 300 megawatts. So with 4 dams producing less than 300 megawatts of electricity, it is just a really small amount of electricity for huge environmental consequences. And under the law, because these dams are so old, once every 50 years they have to be relicensed. And they have to be relicensed to modern standards. And so the dam operator has actually applied to remove the dams because also to try to retrofit them with fish ladders to prevent kills like this would be inordinately expensive, particularly for this very small amount of energy. So as we think about our water strategy, it's important that we also think about how do we promote healthy eco-sheds, while at the same time that we can also look at how do we promote both appropriate water storage and water use so that we are engaging in water conservation that doesn't really require huge amounts of water storage. One of the things that we're also seeing with climate change is as we get a climate that just shifts to hotter, on average hotter, and on average less extreme cold and less snow, although we have had some this year, that one of the dramatic changes we're seeing is less water is stored as snowpack. And that has dramatic consequences for California because we have depended upon the snowpack to replenish our rivers, replenish our water sources during the summer. And as less is stored in snowpack, more of it then becomes rain, which then if we don't use water appropriately and also store water appropriately, then runs out into the ocean. And if you try to then extract water from the ocean, you have to go through desalination, which is very energy intensive. So we have seen a dramatic decline in snowpack, and this is an issue that we expect to continue in California and elsewhere. So Charlie mentioned where the water comes from and paying attention to what's happening in the headwaters and in our communities. And when I was the commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission, I had the opportunity to work with many different communities from all over California, from San Diego to Siskiyou. And this is a picture of my chief of staff, Ditas Katagi, and I when we visited with the Yurok reservation at a public participation hearing. And one of the things that we focused on is also the importance of community conversation and consultation as the predicate for action. So Charlie also had the opportunity to visit with us with the Low-Income Oversight Board in consultation with the Yurok tribe. So there's Charlie there and me on the left, and the chairman of the Yurok tribe on the right, as we're talking about what we could do to coordinate with the tribe and to help them in their quest to get electricity. And so the tribe has been working since 1993 to build electricity, and they're on track to actually be able to build out and to get an electric line to the school, hopefully by September of this year, so that that school will no longer have to run on diesel generators, and that the households that are now dependent today on diesel and wood will be able to have electricity. So I had the opportunity as an academic to write a book chapter for a book that will be published in November on energy justice, US and international perspectives. And my book chapter is on the electricity gap on Native American reservations. Native Americans are the people in America who are less likely to have electricity, and the Yurok Reservation is a great example of that. So my chapter explores some of the reasons why this happened And part of it is about water and the attempt of the federal government and the state government to grab water resources that the Yurok had used for millennia. And so really it has been the leadership of the Yurok that have decided that they want to join the 21st century. And they said that, you know, they feel through their songs, they can talk to the spirits, they can talk to others in the world, but they can't talk on the internet. And they really want to talk on the internet. So building electricity and supporting them in their quest for infrastructure access is important work that Charlie and the Low Income Oversight Board continue to support. So one of the issues that we worked on at the California Public Utilities Commission was looking at the water energy nexus, the embedded energy in water. So when we think about water, we don't often think that there's energy in there. But as you look at how energy is used with regard to water, it's used to move it, pump it, clean it, heat it, use it, clean it again, pump it again, and often move it again. And so these charts also show some of the ways in which you see energy both in the urban context and then in moving water, literally over mountains as we distribute water. And so this is part of why water conservation on a local basis is so important, so that we don't have to spend tremendous amounts of energy moving water, and that we can also sustain our planet. There's also a tremendous amount of water used in energy. So these are some pictures from the Calpine geothermal plant, which is not too far from here in Sonoma. And you see on the right their cooling tower. That uses 30,000 gallons of water a minute, which is actually very typical for a lot of power plants. There's a tremendous amount of water used in energy. So whenever you're saving energy, you're saving water, and vice versa. So as we faced issues like drought, and places like Los Angeles also faced issues like a shortage of natural gas for power plants, one of the hints for staving off blackouts was not only to use less electricity, but to do things like on a day in which a flex alert is called, where they say, please reduce your electricity use, don't water your lawn, okay? Who would think not watering your lawn would help stave blackouts? But that means that then the water company doesn't have to use as much electricity pumping the water and distributing the water. So water conservation is also key to electricity conservation, as is also water conservation with regard to energy. So saving water saves energy. So you can see this through measures like water heaters, clothes washers, but also with things like toilets. And so while the drought is officially over for the moment in California, it's coming back. I know that we had a huge drought when I was in high school, and Governor Brown has presided over efforts as we've had another drought, but also another drought is coming back. So looking at things like continuing to focus on replacing older toilets that are high water using toilets, and especially replacing leaky or running toilets, right? So a leaky old toilet can use more than 200 gallons of water a day. A running toilet can use 2,000 gallons of water a day and run away with both water and also your bills. So another thing that we should do, and this was something that Governor Brown had called for, was literally changing the landscape of California and going back to a more traditional landscape. And so as we look at, like, for example, with removing lawns, the estimated savings in water gallons, 197,000 gallons of water per year saved from lawns. Your average lawn uses as much water as a swimming pool. So when you look at your lawn, think swimming pool, right? And that's what you have. So my husband and I, last year in our small home, we transitioned to a drought-tolerant landscape in our front yard. We got rid of our lawn, and one of the things that we saw is our tree was so much happier. Our tree was in competition with the lawn for the water, and it has been really beautiful. So we use less water, and we also attract hummingbirds, and have created a new home for bees. So looking at what we can do to make California more natural is very important. So with regard to our clean energy goals, Governor Brown has called for and actually signed a bill to increase renewable electricity sources to 50% by 2030. California in 2003 adopted an energy loading order. So first on the loading order is energy efficiency, which are measures designed to structurally embed less use of energy, and then demand response, so that when energy reductions are needed, that people can respond to it, including both through our behavior as well as the Internet of Things. So we are looking in California now at proposals to move to 100% renewable generation. And under the loading order is energy efficiency first, and then demand response, and then in the next set, renewables, and then as a last resort, fossil fuels. So we're now putting into action SB 350 by Senator Kevin De Leon, which has also increased a focus on disadvantaged communities in California and making sure that disadvantaged communities have access to clean energy. Because as we've discussed, this sector is a major contributor to climate change, which has been a contributor to floods as well as to drought. On the federal side, we see very different federal proposals. So President Trump has sought to roll back the Clean Water Act. They have also initiated a proposal that would allow exploration of offshore oil drilling and also natural gas exploration and extraction in the ocean floor all around the United States. The entire continental shelf surrounding the United States, including all of the coast of California, the entire West Coast, is part of what they propose to open up to offshore oil drilling and extraction. So the comment period is open. They received comments, and I'm very proud that 2 of the students in my energy law class submitted comments on this proposal. One of the things that one of my students pointed out, Elena Applebaum, is that in the Interior Department's proposal, they basically said that none of California's ocean waterfront was designated as environmentally sensitive, whereas maps from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration categorize California's entire coast as environmentally sensitive. So there are a lot of issues that need to be reconciled in this proposal, and they're going to have to do massive environmental analysis. There's going to have to be environmental impact reports done for each and every region that would be touched by this. So it's going to be very critical for the public to continue to make the record, because one of the factors that's supposed to be considered under the particular law that governs this is the opinion of the states. The state of California and all the western states are opposed to this proposal, and this proposal would also be disastrous to any communities that depend upon fishing, upon rivers that are also fed from the ocean, and upon our state. So federal policy on energy is really focused on extraction, not on energy or water conservation or on sustainability. And the federal government has also proposed options to stall the retirement of coal and nuclear plants, citing reliability concerns, although the states as well as federal energy market regulators have said that they have found no reliability concerns associated with coal or nuclear retirements. And these are also fuels that use large amounts of energy. So when I was at the CPUC, we also conducted a proceeding looking at the water energy nexus, the embedded energy in water and the embedded water in energy. And so these are things that are continuing to move along as we're able to adopt a cost calculator that makes it easier to calculate the energy savings associated with water savings. We also adopted a decision to promote what I call matinee pricing for energy that would help to attract demand when energy is more abundant, such as during the middle of the day, particularly with solar. And some of the companies, PG&E and Edison, have now moved matinee pricing into their rate design. And one of the things that is really important and will be increasingly important in our future is the communications water energy nexus, how we can use communications both through sensors and through the internet and other means, to better manage energy and water. And this is one of the reasons why net neutrality is important, as we look at these issues. So the last few thoughts I'd like to leave you with, as I mentioned, I've been working with the Yurok tribe on their efforts to get electricity. And so right now, 130 out of the 180 households in the Yurok Reservation upriver communities lack electric power. They still rely on diesel generators, wood, and this is also an area with very limited solar access because of the beautiful forest and fog. But they often end up spending more than $600 a month on diesel or wood, and these are for households where the median income is less than $20,000. It also gets a little crazier than this because in addition to these issues, because they are not customers of any utility, they're ineligible for many of the programs that help utility customers, such as the Energy Savings Assistance Program and California Alternative Rates for Energy. So this is why in the book chapter that I wrote, the question of the book was about energy justice, U.S. and international perspective. My chapter is entitled Energy Access is Energy Justice. And it's about the Yurok tribe's work to close the electricity gap on Native American reservations. As we've been talking about the need to have a more just energy sector, including one which contributes less to greenhouse gases, energy access is really a predicate for addressing those issues of energy justice. And this is not simply an issue that is faced by people in Africa, India, and many places all over the world, but this is an issue that Californians face and that we all together need to address. So while they are working right now to build this line, and hopefully we'll get connected, be able to connect these households in the schools by this fall, after decades of working on this, there are still going to be hundreds of other households on the Yurok Reservation that lack access to electricity. So this is going to be very important for achieving our sustainability goals. So to wrap up where we began in talking about sustainability and values, I'd like to submit that our community conversation should also lead to thinking about commitments. And so I'd like to offer my view that better resource stewardship is needed to promote sustainability. One example of this is the importance of maintaining utility infrastructure to promote safety. Actually, on Monday, I'm going to be leading a tour of utility poles in San Jose, where we're going to be looking at some of the overloaded poles and leaning poles and other things that need attention, because overloaded poles have in the past caused fires in Southern California. The cause of the fires here in the Napa region, as well as in the Santa Barbara area, are still under investigation. But these are issues that are really important to protect our community, to ensure that we are safe, as well as that we have reliable services that are so critical to our everyday lives, our education, energy, and economy. Also addressing energy and water and the interaction between energy and water are important, particularly as we face climate whiplash, these increasing periods of alternating drought and flood. This is really a call to action that we need to be thinking differently about what we have to do differently. And I'm also very honored to be working with the plaintiffs in the Juliana versus US case. And this is a case where a group of youth plaintiffs have sued the federal government for deprivation of life, liberty, and property for failing to address climate change and their consequences. So they've asked us for suggestions about remedy. This case is going to trial in Oregon in October, and the plaintiffs are very hopeful that they will win, and they need help in thinking about what they should ask the court to order the federal government to do. So I'm working with my students and other colleagues and making suggestions about how we can fashion a remedy. But in addition to thinking about what the federal government can do, we need to be thinking about what our state can do, what our communities can do, what our household can do, what our tribe can do, what our friends can do, and what we can do as individuals. So this gentleman was asking, how do we make clear to politicians that there are more important things than their being reelected to office? And So I think that we have seen in this last year, for example, last year and a half, a tremendous rise in political activism. I'll share with you, my husband and I, we bought some tie-dye piece shirts. And so we've been to 3 protests in the last 6 months. We hadn't been to 3 protests together in our 15 years of marriage. And so our tie-dye shirts have gotten lots of workouts. But we're seeing increased action in the streets all over America, right? As well as on the internet, through communities, through people coming together like this. So I think people making clear what's important to them, it really sends a message, right? This is also about taking action at the ballot box, but also staying in action every day. So whether it's also, filing comments in proceedings, so sometimes it seems wonky, but it's really important. Holding agencies accountable also where they don't pay attention to proceedings. So yesterday, the Senate actually voted through the Congressional Review Act to overturn the FCC's decision, which eliminated the net neutrality requirements. Now it's going over to the House. So communicating to the House about how important net neutrality is an example of the type of action that we can get through. So I wrote an article, which hopefully will be published shortly in the San Diego Journal of Climate and Energy, called Net Neutrality Powers Energy and Forestalls Climate Change. And it's about the role of net neutrality. As we talked about, communications is increasingly being used to manage our energy and water ecosystem. If we let corporations get in the way with that, we let the internet service providers make deals with others for paid priority, especially in a way that could degrade other users, and they could make those deals for their own business interests. It can harm democracy, it can harm energy, it can harm water, it can harm our economy, it can harm our health. If we turn the internet over to something which is just simply managed for the interests of the corporation and not for the interests of users. The internet was started to foster choice by users. So I think your being here and continuing to speak up in every venue about these things is how we're going to get to accountability and action on these issues.
One of the issues that we're seeing is our rural areas here in Napa County are disconnected. We're seeing problems, and when we speak of them, it sort of goes into a vacuum. Is there a network of other rural areas in which a larger network can be built? Have you started to see a way?
Yeah, I think that that's an important question. So you also have the Rural Counties Association, RCRC, and so the Rural Counties Association is actually a very powerful association. I've had the opportunity to speak with RCRC several times, both in Sacramento and also to visit many rural counties, where California's rural counties meet to collaborate on issues of common interest. And when we talk about rural counties, it's places like Napa and Humboldt and Del Norte, but also places like San Bernardino and Riverside, right, which have vast rural areas. They really have a couple of larger cities right along the freeway, and other than that, you have vast rural areas, right? Riverside County is bigger than 6 eastern states. And again, 95% of California's landmass is rural. So I learned a lot when I was a commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission by going out there and talking to people and understanding the conditions they face. I'm a Latina from East LA. My family started out in a trailer park and then we moved up to the barrio. And I know LA, and I know the smog of LA and the problems of LA. I have asthma because I was exposed to all of the issues and smog and problems in LA. But also my mother is from a rural area, Benson, Arizona, where they're still served by a rural electric co-op. It's in between Tucson and Tombstone, and I describe it as closer in distance and time to Tombstone than to Tucson. And we still have many California communities that experience that. When we went to the Yurok Reservation, you go back not just to the 20th century, but to the 19th century, where they're still struggling to get electricity. And they're not alone. There are places in Siskiyou that don't have electricity. There are firehouses that don't have electricity, and this really affects us when we have big problems. But also reshaping expectations. One of the things that was striking to me when I started to visit more rural areas all over the state, from the Sierra to our southern border regions to the northern border regions, is how much diesel is used in rural areas, especially stationary diesel, such as diesel generators. And part of what happens is that the Air Resources Boards for those areas do not limit the use of stationary diesel in a way that they do in Los Angeles or in the Bay Area. So a diesel generator used 24 hours a day to run a school, well, frankly, I think it's inconsistent with both California and state law as it is, but it certainly would never be permitted in Los Angeles because of the Air Resources Board. Why does Humboldt County permit it? And especially as we now see with the science that things like diesel actually contribute to climate change, and diesel actually contributes to global warming faster than does other GHGs, and reducing diesel particulates can actually improve the whole GHG profile faster than even could reducing other GHGs. So I think that there's opportunities for awareness and conversation in rural communities. And so I think RCRC would be a great forum, as well as, of course, many of the Native American tribes. And then also the colleges, which serve many of our rural areas, I think are also an important forum, as well as both the California and U.S. Department of Agriculture are also very interested in this, because also one of the other places in California where we most see lack of access to electricity is on farm fields. So we always think, well, you know, didn't we all learn in school that the Rural Electrification Administration electrified America? Well, what they did is that they brought electricity to the farmer's house, but not the farmer's field. And they skipped Native American reservations. Native American tribes are not eligible for rural electrification grants. So addressing the farmer's field so that they are not reliant on diesel generators to pump water is also going to be a way that we help to reduce greenhouse gases, reduce diesel particulates, and also increase productivity and economic opportunity. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Really enjoyed our conversation. Take care.
Now we're going to transition to our first morning panel. So our panelists are going to be, we're going to have Edward join us back again. And then we have Santa Elena City Council member Jeff Ellsworth, as well as, Forest Forever Paul Hughes. So if we can give a round of applause as they make their way up here. So first of all, we want to cover some of these points to the best of your abilities here, panelists. We're going to talk about what a watershed is, what a healthy watershed actually looks like, the connection between trees and water, the importance of riparian corridors. We don't want to forget about the headwaters too, so we want to connect the whole geological length of Napa Valley. That includes Vallejo, includes Lake County, right? So the whole full length of the watershed. And what the current conditions are in our area, given that there has been droughts, what the recharge status of our aquifers are and water basins. So essentially, we want to rebrief again what a watershed is from your perspectives, or your expertise also, and get a check-in of what the status of our Napa Valley watersheds is. So, if we're going to start first off with Jeff Ellsworth, okay? So if you want to take it away and share a couple.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Ellsworth. I'm from St. Helena. I'm an accidental politician. I have been a community activist for I'd say about 5 years. I'm an artist. I grew up in St. Helena in the Upper Valley, Napa County. About 5 years ago, somebody mentioned to me they thought something was not working right at City Hall, and it's a town that I love, a community I love, and so I went down and started asking questions and going to meetings and feeling like the residents, the community, were being left out of the political decisions. So seeing a political problem that was leading to environmental impacts and water impacts. And as I dug deeper and spent more time looking at it, the realization that water is not only the basis of all our environmental balance, it's also the key component of our equity in our homes and our businesses. And if it's not properly distributed, you can see an equity shift. We recently had water rate changes, and I'll wrap this up so we can introduce everybody, but we had water rate changes that jacked the rates up about 2,000% for some small businesses in downtown St. Helena. And luckily we got a new council that was able to bring those down because we realized it was going to force these people out of business by charging them too much for their water. And so that got lit a fire under me to really start looking at our water issues and our water equity issues and how they relate to the natural watershed that supplies the water. So that's sort of where I'm coming from.
I'm Paul Hughes. I'm the Executive Director of Forests Forever, which has been around since 1989. We were birthed with a ballot measure to protect headwaters forests. Some of you may remember that fight for the virgin redwood grove up north that's now a public preserve, and we also were advocating banning clear cutting and quite a few other things, including stream buffers, more robust stream buffer rules than we have now. We are still continuing the fight and are currently involved in advocating for Measure C here. I know this is not an advocacy event, but I'll just mention this by way of information. We're trying to get Measure C passed to protect oak woodlands and create better stream buffers for our water supply here in Napa County. And my expertise, our expertise, is more on timber policy, that is the rules and regs that govern how logging occurs in the state, and our advocacy to ban clear cutting and such destructive and unnecessary practices as that. However, what we do with timber policy is very relevant also to oak woodland removal, which is more the issue here in Napa County, and I'd probably say a little more about that later. Okay. Very relevant to our water quality and quantity.
I'm a native ecologist, fire ecologist. I'm native to this part of California, Sonoma County, Mendocino County, and Sacramento Valley area. I'm 4 different tribes, Pomo, Wintu, Wailaki, and Paiute. And I became a fire ecologist, native land management person through my desire to learn my native ways, and specifically basket weaving. I started out becoming a basket weaver, and through that I learned that I needed to take care of the whole environment to get the materials that I needed from nature.
Now that we have a little bit of a feel for who we are talking and conversating with today, I have some guiding questions, but by no means does that mean you have to be limited specifically to those. It'd be great to follow those questions, those guiding questions, but if there's something that you feel really needs to be spoken on this subject, please go ahead and add to the conversation, panelists. So one of my first questions is, what does a healthy watershed really look like?
I looked at the EPA's website expecting to find nothing of much use there for reasons that I think all of you well understand now. It hasn't been completely stripped clean of any truth and valuable information yet. They had a page on what a healthy watershed looks like, and they said it's one in which a natural land cover can support water collection, purification, storage, and distribution. I'm paraphrasing. Can support habitat of sufficient size and connectivity to support native, aquatic, and riparian species, and can support physical, chemical, water quality conditions able to support healthy biological communities. Note the words natural land cover are in that definition. A healthy watershed is one in which natural land cover can support these things. And it went on to say that that healthy watersheds are not very common now. It's only in, or largely in, large protected natural areas, mostly in the West, where we have truly healthy watersheds remaining. And here again, removal of natural ground cover is probably the most easily identifiable impact to water quality. There are pollutants that end up in the water, especially in urban areas, but here in a rural area like Napa County, removal of natural ground cover is the biggest thing we can do to impact water quality and quantity. And we've got rampant development of vineyards going on now with no important checks, and as well as the usual urbanization.
One of the problems I think we have here is, you know, everybody knows there's a problem in Flint, Michigan. It's clear. We've learned that. But because the Napa Valley, Napa County is beautiful, and it's promoted as a beautiful area, the problems are unapparent, I think, to the outside area. And that's why I appreciate folks that have come from the Bay Area to start to understand that we're having a sort of invisible problem. The Napa River is the second largest freshwater inlet into the San Francisco Bay. I grew up in the wine industry, and I was very proud of that, and I always have been. But we have a growth in the wine and the wine hospitality industry that is pushing out of balance. And some of the issues are with the vineyard development, we're seeing chemical and fertilizer use close to our water sources that feed our municipal reservoirs and also the Napa River, which leads into the San Francisco Bay. So if even organic planting that is fertilizer can feed these algae blooms, gets into the river, gets into the bay. It impacts our water sources. Also, we're seeing the ability to divert water above our reservoirs, so water that would feed a municipality and keep the municipality healthy, both its private investment in that municipality and also the municipality itself depends on a healthy flow of water to support all its services, all its city services, emergency services, public works, etc. Water's a commodity that our cities sell to our residents. They purchase it. That money goes into keeping the system working. If we don't have the water, the system starts to break down. In the Central Valley, we see areas where towns have run dry, and they're surrounded by beautiful agriculture. And the people in the towns are like, well, why do they get the water and we don't? And we are at risk for that here. So even people with $2 million or $10 million homes, if they don't have water, the value of what they invested in is diminished. And so also the chemical content, if we are absorbing chemicals that we can't see, we know, I think it was 2013, there was an analysis of wineries, 40% were out of compliance with either their production or their visitation levels. And so if you're over your production level, you're using more chemicals than you're permitted to use. So we don't even know what the baseline is. We know that the cancer rates in Napa County are some of the highest in the state. The county looks beautiful. So it's hard to get this message out. And so we're reaching outside of Napa County and saying, hey, we've got to do this together as a state. And I believe we have to find a way, if in a relatively affluent and relatively well-educated county such as Napa, we cannot protect our water sources, I worry about the headwaters in the rest of the state. So I think we have to make this a statewide discussion because urban areas depend on rural water sources for their water too. So I'm hoping we can elevate this water discussion outside of the county and connect to our urban partners.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Would you like to add anything else? And then, if I may also, it looks like we're making the natural progression into the status of our watersheds and some of the issues that might be with it. So, but please go ahead, Edward.
I think we need to change our whole mindset about this. We talk about, when we talk about these issues, we always just talk about what's locally, and we need to talk about more, where our water is coming from, which is, our whole watershed. We can't think far enough away. And another part of it is that the bar that we're trying to achieve is too low. Like our high bar is too low. What we want when we talk about the environment or the things that we want to be good and safe and healthy, like for example the watershed. When we say how do we want it, what do we want our watershed to be like, and then our high bar that we have is that we want it to be sustainable, and that's not good, because the example that I tell people is like if somebody's asking you about your marriage, how are things with your wife, and you say it's sustainable, what does that mean? What does that tell you about our high bar? We don't want just that. We want something we want our bar to be much higher. We want our relationship with our wife to be, flourishing and wonderful. And so that's the high bar that we should be trying to achieve instead of just sustainability.
And given we have all types of audiences today, we have people who have been fighting the good fight to protect.
A single raindrop can cause splash erosion where it's hitting the ground with full force, unmitigated, and sending up a little puff of soil particles, loosening the soil. That little impact of that raindrop would not hit the ground if a tree were there. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but when you multiply it times millions of raindrops hitting bare ground, it causes a significant erosion problem to have that splash erosion at the micro level happening, and then also no ground cover left to prevent sheet erosion and gullying that happens. In the canyon country of southern Utah and in parts of Arizona and New Mexico where there are very few trees, we see flash flooding. You've got rain hitting bare ground, very little soil to absorb the water, and so it runs off very quickly, causes a huge slurry of dirty water to rush downstream, and then in a flash, the whole area dries out again. That can happen too in areas that are naturally forested, and has happened many times in timber country on the North Coast. Look at the fire after the Thomas Fire, what happened in Montecito in Santa Barbara County. Intense fire killed trees to the roots in many cases, up canyon, removed canopy, and afterwards a heavy rainfall caused a debris torrent that wiped out communities downstream. Those debris torrents are a slurry of filthy water. It's a combination of a tsunami and an avalanche where boulders, houses, cattle, cars are all being carried down in a sort of plastic flow that moves very rapidly and destructively and strips all the soil off the slopes up canyon. And debris torrents happen in country that has been deforested too. So those would be metaphors that I would use to talk about how trees can mitigate the impact of our water quality.
Thank you, Paul.
Trees are so important for our environment. And we could have a whole symposium on the importance of trees and how it affects climate. One of the key things that trees do, or groves of trees do, is that they affect the moisture in an ecosystem. If the trees aren't there, there's no rain in the adjoining valley. If the trees are there, there's rain in the adjoining valley at certain times a year, because the trees make that happen. The trees cycle moisture in an ecosystem. In a lot of different ways, where they bring it up out of the ground, and then up through their leaves, and then transpire it into the air, and then back into the ground again. It could just recycle the moisture over and over again. That's just one thing they could do. We could go on and on.
Yeah.
One of the arguments I try to make, somebody who grew up in the wine business here, since the 1960s, when Napa County was discovering that it could grow premium wine grapes and compete with France and Europe in making great quality wines. And I believe a lot of that has to do with microclimate, that we have a microclimate here that allows premium wine grapes to grow. And that microclimate depends on trees that, as the fog comes up the valley, they hold the fog, they distribute moisture, they keep the valley much cooler. Simple experiment you can do on a hot day is stand under a tree and then step out and stand in the sun, and you'll see the tremendous differential in heat. So if you multiply that by all these trees in our watershed, they keep the valley cooler. And that's what allows these fantastic grapes to grow. And so I believe protecting our watershed is protecting our premium agriculture here. It's a balance. And if short-term profit suggests that we strip the trees, we're really breaking down our system. And my father was a systems engineer in the wine industry. And he understood flow and water dynamics. And, you know, I sort of picked it up going to wineries with him since I was a kid. Part of our system is the natural watershed. That's where we collect the water. That's what keeps our microclimate operational. If we strip that away, we diminish our ability to produce these great quality grapes. And whether you agree with climate change or not, microclimate change can happen by stripping out your local vegetation.
You explained what a healthy watershed is, what a healthy relationship is. So what are we dealing with in Napa at the moment? And then we'll take questions from the public.
One of the biggest changes that's happened in Napa County in the last 50 years happened in 2008. 50 years ago, the supervisors voted to have an agricultural preserve in Napa County. And that allowed less commercial development and keeping more in agriculture. In 2008, when the general plan was changed in Napa County, the word agriculture was altered, and it was never put to the general public. I made the argument it's like creating a panda preserve and then changing the definition of what a panda is. So we've got a situation where the definition of agriculture has been altered to include marketing and wine marketing as agriculture. It basically commercializes agriculture and allows for much more commercial activity on ag land that is much thirstier. It needs more water. It also can get outside private equity funding, and which wants a larger return. So I think we have a thirstier business here now that seeks more water and is answerable to investors who are less concerned about local impacts and more concerned with profits. So I think that that's something different that's happening here that started about 10 years ago, and we're seeing the impacts now.
And for this last question, you each have about 2 minutes to finish this part. Thank you, Jeff.
Soils should be mentioned too, that ground cover, take an oak woodland savanna, oak savanna with grassland in between sparse stands of oak trees. That ground cover is creating rich soil that absorbs and purifies water. Without the natural cover, you don't have tree roots penetrating to rock, breaking up the rock, bringing transpiring water up from the groundwater into the air, as Edward mentioned. And when the tree dies, those root conduits can carry water down into the water table. But also the deadfall and the woody material from the tree and the grass itself is building up the soil and creating a sponge that can hold that water, aerate it, and filter it. And without that woody material and without that grassland cover, you don't have the spongy soils that you need for not only water collection and purification and slow distribution into the streams and creeks nearby, but also for agriculture.
We've allocated about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Hello. I'm going to play the devil's advocate and possibly a Pollyanna, and I'd like to address this question to Jeff and perhaps other people. I see Jim Wilson here who could answer it. If there is evidence of, or if degradation is occurring in the Napa Basin groundwater, where is the evidence of that? I speak specifically of the latest Sigma report on the groundwater sustainability for the county, and the indication there is that despite 5 years of relative drought, that the subbasin's aquifer level, according to the monitoring wells, has been maintained. If in fact there is a problem, why has it not showed up?
Yes, we do show sustainable water use in the sub-basin. And I would like to say that the question might be, is sustainability the high bar? Ultimately, I would say also, as Edward says, no. And so what we're working on here locally is a watershed and oak woodland protection initiative that raises that bar. What we need is a regenerative, healthy water system. And the best way we can mess with that currently anywhere on the planet is by desertifying our watershed. And we do that by removing the forests. As we heard Edward talk about a little bit also, it is about where water goes in this water system. We don't like hearing that there's a cost sometimes to carbon dioxide being breathed in by trees, namely, by some accounts, 300 molecules of water being breathed out for every molecule of CO2 being inhaled. That's just the way it is. And so I would say that when I look at water security, I look first of all at our carbon cycle. They're interlinked. And I think the background I hear from Catherine here today also, like this panel, is what do we do to protect our water cycle is about what do we do to protect our carbon cycle. Ultimately, we have a climate crisis, which is what Catherine is referring to when she refers to her precipitation disconnect, the extremes that we're seeing. Ultimately, the solutions have to be prospective. We have to guard against the future, and we can guard against the future by doing several things. First of all, we hear about short-lived climate forcers. We really have to find a way to dispose of woody biomass in ways other than to burn it, because that generates black carbon, which has a global warming potential in a 10 to 20 year time horizon, 3,000 times that of carbon dioxide. That's the killer. And so that's why the United Nations now has Mission 2020. Mission 2020 is about reducing carbon pollution from deforestation from 10 to 12% to 0 by 2020. It's just an amazing task. Ultimately, that means creating new solutions to woody biomass removal. Ultimately, the question, as Catherine says, is how do we find a pathway in new leadership and our culture for preserving forests, which help everything that flows from that: water security, water purity, and a healthy, livable climate.
Thank you, Jim.
I guess my point is that we can do studies, we can do groundwater studies, we can take data from one side or another, but to me, the hearing from people that their wells are not working the way they used to work, seeing the deforestation, seeing the algae blooms, seeing what is, to me, a clear risk to our water sources that protect not only our health but also our equity. I'm trying to move forward as quickly as possible, waking people up to the necessity to have these water security conversations, and and we as citizens, rather than depending on government, the government is here to serve us. And I want to make sure that we uncover every truth and not just depend on somebody's word for it, because it's too important. It's too important. Our water security and our equity depends on us.
The groundwater analysis that was done for the Napa Basin is stable at this point. However, there are other areas in Napa where it is not. Coombsville, Carneros, an area down below Soda Creek, below where Soda Canyon comes in, those are all dropping fast and at an expanded rate. So additionally, it's interesting that the city of Napa, the county of Napa, did all of their analysis based to attempt to get an alternative plan instead of the typical plan that is carried on by most of the counties in the state, because they used a lot of wells for analysis that were put in too recently to gain adequate analysis. It's a flawed plan. It was paid for by the county to prove that everything was just fine right now. It is not fine. Take a look at the city reservoirs and the situation in all the city reservoirs, and that's what you could talk to, Jeff, is about the reasons that the city of St. Helena is so concerned about their municipal water source. So it's cherry-picking data. And I'm
We're going to
done.
have
Thank
to
you.
wrap it up there. That concludes our panel. If we can have a round of applause again for our panelists, Jeff, Paul, Edward. So next we have some students from Napa Valley College giving us a presentation of where does your water come from, all right? And these are students from the Napa Valley College MESA program. It's a mathematics, science, and engineering. It's a program that focuses on pushing for science and technology in communities that could use more resources allocated to us. Because historically we've had not that very available for our communities.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Napa Valley College student panel on our presentation. My name is Jose Manuel Vega. I'm a chemical engineering major. I'm going to be transferring to UC Davis this fall. I'm from Zamora, Michoacan, Mexico, and just a little line about why I care about water. I really love nature. I really love going on hikes, and I really love seeing the beautiful rivers and the beautiful lakes, and I really want to preserve them for future generations to come. So I really do care about our water.
Hello, my name is Maria Palafox. I'm second-year transfer here at Napa Valley College. I'm studying to become an electrical engineer. I'm from Mexico too. I was born in Guanajuato City. And the reason why I wanted to do this water research project is because back in high school I took an environmental class, science, and there we learned about the natural resource cycles. And every day I would leave that class just mind-blown about all the bad things that are happening to those natural resources due to our fast-growing population. And due to that, I would just wonder, is there anything I could help? And in order to help those natural resources, for example, the water cycle that we're talking about right now, I need to know where it comes from. I need to know how we use it, and therefore I could just, if there's anything I can help, I would do to help. And due to all this research I've been doing with my team, I can think about all those ideas and the little things that I could do to improve our water cycle.
My name is Sebastian Rubio Gomez, and the reason I decided to take up on this project was I'm an aspiring environmental and civil engineer. So when Maria Vargas told me about this water project, it immediately rang a bell in my ear, and I was like, oh yeah, that's something that I'm going to be doing in the future. If I'm going to be potentially protecting the water of the population in the future, this would be a good base to kind of get a lick of what I'm going to be doing in the future. Thank you.
All right, morning everyone. My name is Brandon Lee Gonzalez-Gray. My current major as of right now is computer engineering. And what interested me most about this project is the amount of water that we need to survive. Personally for me, I was born and raised in Northridge, LA, but going back to my mother's and father's heritage, they're both my mother born in Nicaragua and my father born in Guatemala. And my father was one of 16 children, and his father owned a whole bunch of land. So of course to me that sounded like, wow, that's a lot of water they have to use. So that means to me they needed to know about their headwaters, they need to know more about their water, to fully have their land flourish in vegetables, fruits, and every other things. And personally for me, I love to swim, so of course I'd love to know more about our water, know possibly where to swim in a good manner. And for me, water is not only important to me, it's important as you, beautiful people, as well for everyone else in Napa County.
Where does the city of Napa get its water? So I've done some research with my team here, and we found that the city of Napa usually gets its water from reservoirs, two main reservoirs, which is Lake Hennessy and Milliken Reservoir. And it also gets water from the state water project, the North Bay Aqueduct is another way. And then our third way we get our water from is groundwater sources. So with more information on the reservoirs in Lake Hennessy, I'm going to pass it on to Maria, who will cover Lake Hennessy in detail.
All right, so to the right you see Lake Hennessy, a picture of Lake Hennessy Reservoir, and to the left you see a Milliken Reservoir, and just the size of it underneath the titles. So Lake Hennessy was formed by Concrete Dam, and it was built in 1948 across Concrete, and it was authorized mainly to prevent the flooding downstream, or the downstream down the Napa River. And as you can see right there, you can see that all the water is being covered by that dam. And next I have a picture of Lake Hennessy, and if you could see, there are three main creeks that run and collect the water. They're used to collect the water in Lake Hennessy. And the first one to the bottom right is Con Creek, and that one follows Con Valley Road. The next one is Sage Creek, and that one follows Sage Canyon Road. And then the top right-hand corner, we see Chiles Creek, and that one runs through Chiles Pope Valley Road. And this one connects to Mon Creek, so those two are used to collect the water down Lake Hennessy. So we know that these creeks start somewhere, and as we researched, we found out that they come down to, or they reach all the way up to the Napa Alice Mountains, and this is where our headwaters are. And usually it comes from rain and melt, perhaps snow melt, and those collect the water down to Lake Hennessy, and it's used to provide water for Napa Valley. So there are other nearby streams that are used to collect the water to Lake Hennessy, and those are Clear Creek, Bell's Law, and Rector Creek, and those are just many other little creeks that are used to collect all that water. And then we'll move to the Milliken Reservoir, which Jose has more information on that.
A little history on it. Milliken Reservoir was one of the first reservoirs for water supply of the city of Napa. It was built in 1923. The next reservoir that was built was for Lake Hennessy. So the Milliken Reservoir has it's mainly fed from Milliken Creek, and that has its headwaters in the Napa Atlas Mountains. So as I mentioned earlier, it's just a collection of rainwater runoff and sometimes snowmelt, and it leads into the Milliken Reservoir, which is held up by a dam. So the water then from that dam is let off into a secondary dam where it gets, it's called a diversion dam, and it gets treated by a water treatment plant there. And then from there on, after it's treated, that's down to the city of Napa for water use. So those are the main two reservoirs that are used for the city of Napa, but there's also many other reservoirs in the Napa Valley in Napa County as well. So I'll transition over to the Napa River. So I mentioned Napa River has its headwaters in Mount St. Helena. So Mount St. Helena has a lot of snow runoff and a lot of rain runoff down to Kimball Creek, and Kimball Creek goes down into a reservoir called Kimball Reservoir. And it's a small little dam just north of Calistoga. After that dam, it leads down the Napa River through Calistoga and into St. Helena. So that's where the Napa River flows. The Napa River flows into St. Helena. St. Helena has its own reservoir as well. So the city of St. Helena has Bell Reservoir. So Bell Reservoir is a reservoir put up by a little dam close to the St. Helena Hospital. And the headwaters for the Bell Reservoir are by Bell Creek. And Bell Creek has its headwaters on a mountain side, which is actually the same mountainside as Etna Springs on the north side. So on the south slopes, we have Bell Creek, but on the northern slope, we have what's called Swartz Creek, and Swartz Creek leads into Etna Springs. Etna Springs is part of the Pewter Creek watershed, and the Pewter Creek watershed has a main body of water of Clear Lake, and Clear Lake leads down to Pewter Creek and empties into Lake Berryessa. We have the Napa River watershed and the Pewter Creek watershed, but we do have some water coming from Lake Berryessa to Lake Hennessy by a few little creeks there. So we do share a little bit of the headwaters. So as the Napa River flows down past city of St. Helena, it also leads down into Yountville, and Yountville has its own little reservoir called the Rector Reservoir. And the Rector Reservoir, along with Lake Hennessy, supplies water for the city of Yountville. So the Rector Reservoir has its headwaters as the Napa Atlas Mountains as well. So I mentioned the city of St. Helena gets some of its water from the Bell Reservoir, which has its headwaters on the mountainside. But the city of St. Helena also gets some of its water from the State Water Project, from the North Bay Aqueduct. The North Bay Aqueduct comes in from the Sierra Mountains and goes through the Jameson Canyon Water Treatment Plant and is pumped up towards St. Helena. With more information on the North Bay Aqueduct, I'm going to pass it on to Sebastian, who is going to go into more specifics about that.
So in 1966, the city of Napa saw that Lake Hennessy and the Milliken reservoirs were good sources of water, but they decided to add one more source of water. And this is where the State Water Project comes in. So the State Water Project, what it does is that it diverts water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, as you can see on the top right corner of the map. And then from there, it goes to the Bakerslow pumping plant just east of Vacaville. And from there, it travels 21 miles via the North Bay Aqueduct, and it meets in the Cordelia pumping plant and the Forebay. And from there, it serves contractors to Napa and Solano counties. And from there, the State Water Project pumps an additional 6 miles to the North Bay Aqueduct terminal reservoirs, and it pumps into 5 million raw water gallons. And then from there, an additional 7 million gallon pump was installed in 1968. And from there, this State Water Project feeds into the city of Napa and Calistoga. And this water is treated over at the Edward I. Barwick Jameson Canyon WTP. And Napa and Calistoga get the majority of the State Water Project entitlement, but American Canyon as well gets some of this raw water. And with groundwater, I'm going to pass it on to Brandon. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sebastian. Well, as we know, not all of our water necessarily comes from headwaters and creeks and rivers. They are also sourced from our groundwater, much more specifically aquifers. As you can tell here on this model, there shows 3 aquifers: an aconfined aquifer, a confined aquifer, and an aquitar, which is the middle bedrock between separating the 2 aquifers. Now, an unconfined aquifer is a permeable body of rock that contains and is able to transfer the body of water contained with them, but they are much more susceptible towards surface water, such as wildlife refuges and irrigated agriculture, creating such as small ponds and small lakes. Now, for us to be able to siphon the water from the aquifers, we would necessarily need to inject a well into the confined aquifers, where that body of water is much more pressurized into pushing out all of this water throughout this permeable rock. And that's where we usually get our agricultural supply well, which is, as you may tell, is below the aquitar and in the confined aquifer, pushing out that water for irrigated agriculture. And through this groundwater, you can see in this image here, that well of that irrigated agricultural well, as I've noted before, as these wells are mostly used for farming purposes. And as you may tell, it is surrounded by vineyards. So in this case, it's much more used and utilized in vineyard production and providing that perfect grade for wine, for the wine industry. And as of right now, data from back to September 2017, we have around 21 wells. Yet most of these wells are privately owned and they're privately used for farming. Now, in order to monitor the groundwater, as it is very difficult to go ahead and look in the ground and see how much water is beneath the ground, Napa County has embarked on a countywide groundwater monitoring program, which is to develop a sound understanding of groundwater conditions through groundwater monitoring and data management. They are also wanting to provide foundation for coordinated integrated water resources planning and dissemination of key water resource information. And as you can tell from these bullet points, these are the promises that the County of Napa has embarked to with the groundwater monitoring program, to be able to anticipate the amount of usage of the water and to avoid any missteps if they were to occur. And these are our works cited that we have utilized in researching for this symposium. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause to our MESA students. And I know there's a lot of elders out there or people on the ground that have been trying to enforce, the policy so they don't always get actually followed. But this was really good. Thank you for breaking it down and how this works and is supposed to work. So we can take one or two questions. I'm going to ask the first one, and that is, do we share any of our watersheds with any surrounding counties or any of our headwaters, or do they come only strictly from the Napa County borderlines?
Lake Hennessy is actually pretty close to Lake County, and we do share some headwaters with Lake County. There is a little bit of creeks that run down from Lake Berryessa down into Lake Hennessy. So yes, we do share some headwaters with Lake County, Napa County.
Unconfined aquifers, I would like to say, are near the surface, as they do provide water for wildlife refuges such as marshes, small swamps, and as well as ponds. Confined aquifers, I would like to say, are much more below that. I would probably say below 500 feet or even more, as it really depends of the agriculture surroundings. So valleys, mountain areas would also depend as how much water has been collected, as most of the water for groundwater has been collected through precipitation, runoff, frost and snow, sleet, and water for below that is like a sponge. So it could necessarily still retain that amount of water, but it also depends on how much water it has gained from, as I said before, precipitation, runoff, and frost.
Do you have a sense of how much acre feet of water the 21 wells take up per year?
As of right now, recorded since 2017 of September, there's about 12,489.6 acres that ad is taken up.
Let's give a shout out and a round of applause again for all the students. Quick context to the documentary, The Sky is the Roof, is produced by Suscol Intertribal Council, and it really helps dig at an indigenous perspective for water stewardship and watershed stewardship.
I remember as a kid, I used to catch fish with my hands. We'd go down here and people would go, well, you guys use a spear. But no, we used to grab them by our hands and throw them on the beach. And then somebody else would, clean them. And even our dogs used to catch the fish. They'd go in there and catch the fish and take them back to land. It's so funny to see the little dogs do that.
And indigenous people always thought to 7 generations. 7 generations from now, how would the world be affected? It's hard to think of areas like this, natural areas of beauty, which, again, the whole valley used to look like this. The whole Napa Valley was this idyllic, paradisical area that is just being literally eaten alive. This would be a place that would sustain large populations in their permanent settings. And this is the Napa River, and you used to be able to swim in here all year round and raft. In the 1970s, 1980s, we could come put in a raft here and raft almost all the way to Napa, which you really can't do that anymore. This isn't enough water to sport a canoe or a raft.
So, as Native people, we're connected to the ground that we're born to the waters that feed us, to the land that gives us the fruit of the acorn, the berries, the deer, the elk, and we're stewards. We're taught to take care of those things. And there's a big battle going on throughout the world for clean water, drinking water. And this is the thing that is most paramount important, is to not destroy the underground aquifers, not to destroy the drinking water, because once it's destroyed and diminished in quality, it's not viable for people to drink. When you have someone that mines down this way and rots out this way, and they fracture the land, they fracture the structure, they go through the aquifers. They drill right through them. Uranium mining is the same way, that they have no care. Their greed for the uranium, for the tar sands, is more important than people's water. The underground aquifer is going someplace. It's going to come up someplace. Mother Earth does that. She cleanses that water and she gives it to us. And through the corporations and countries, states, they're destroying what is ours, what is our birthright, what is humanity's need for clean water. There's always somebody downstream, so what you do upstream affects those people downstream. And as stewards, we need to be mindful of all the users, because it's precious. The water's precious.
This panel right now is to focus on challenges to our watersheds. So what are the challenges that we're seeing? So we want to provide a different angles at what challenges we're facing as communities in relation to water and watersheds, and what are some solutions or creative, innovative things we can do to address some of those issues. So that's what today is.
Let's see, I started working in the valley in 1975. We started our own winery up in Angwin in 1978. Small winery, we farm about 40 acres right now. Hillside stuff. I got involved with the land trust, I don't know, probably 8 or 10 years ago. The Wild Lake property, 3,000 acres up at the headwaters of the Bell Canyon, Bell Creek. That'll work.
Thank you, Randy. And my name is Julio Soriano. I don't always like to say I'm an immigrant because, we have 2 immigrants here next to each arm of mine. But I am a recent immigrant, even though my family has been in this continent for thousands of years. I'm an uninvited indigenous immigrant to this beautiful Napa Valley, making my home here with my family. And basically, I work around socio-ecological issues. Many grassroots groups like Napa Valley Dream Team, Napa Valley Ethnic Studies Advocates, Napa Valley Rapid Response, Latinos Unidos, and doing marches, protests, petition collecting, and art, etc. That's sort of my element, is the nexus of social justice, education, and art, performance, and visual. So that's a little bit about myself.
And I'm Sherry Gardner. I'm an ecologist, and I've worked with Friends of the Napa River for about 20 years, doing benthic macroinvertebrate surveys and studying the historical ecology of landscape change in the Napa Valley. Currently the education director and executive director for Friends of the Napa River, and I worked briefly for the California Land Stewardship Institute as well, and working on some of the restoration projects along the river further up valley, and working on the fish-friendly farming program, certification program, and ranching program through CLSI. And I love the river, and I think it's really an exciting time for the Napa River in a lot of ways, but there are lots of challenges, so I'm excited to have this conversation.
And for our first question, we're self-moderating ourselves. Not self-monitoring, self-moderating. Our first question is, what are the challenges that our watersheds and water, everything tied to this, are facing? What's the state of our watersheds, water challenges and hardships? Does anybody here today, Randy or Sherry, would you want to take
a review about the river? So, as you are probably all well aware, the river's changed pretty dramatically over the last 200 years. It was just mostly a natural river for the 10,000 years before, when people still managed the land, but the river itself was not, as far as I know, particularly managed. But over the last 200 years, as soon as the European settlers moved into the scene, they started draining the swamp and overflowed lands, which are our critically important marshes, straightening the channels of the river, diverting river, and simplifying the channel and building up the banks so it couldn't spread out like a river likes to do. That caused that energy of the river when it rains to carve down, and the river has dropped 30 feet in places, and downcut and incised, which causes a lot of instability in the river as well. So the river's had some hard times. I think that we are starting as a society and as a community to understand more about how rivers function in a natural way. And 20 years ago, when Measure A was passed, we came up with this idea of creating a living river and addressing flood control issues by using natural, to some degree, natural river processes, and restoring some of those marshlands, the swamp and overflowed lands. A lot of those have been restored. So we're making some progress. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I think we have much that we're coming around and we're learning how things can work and maybe relearning how things work. I think a lot of traditional knowledge has been lost by the European settlers anyway. So building that back into our present day culture is going to be really important, I think, for all of us. But it's also been interesting, I think, from the historical ecology research that I did, talking to a lot of old timers who used to spend their summers in the river all summer long. They would float down the river and fish in the river, and there was just a lot more connection with the river. And as we've become more concerned about liability and private property rights, and a lot of corporations have bought up a lot of land, there are fewer and fewer places for people to access the river. And there's also that perception that the river is really dirty and polluted, because it was. And so, when the tannery wastes, and there wasn't a sewage treatment facility in St. Helena or Calistoga until the 1970s. So there was a lot of pretty hardcore stuff going into the river for a long time. And there's still that perception in people's minds that the river's dirty and polluted and dangerous. I think, interestingly, a lot of old timers now, grew up in the river at the time when it was really polluted and they were fine. But it's a public perception in general. I don't think it's just here either, that fear of water being dangerous. And so reconnecting to the river is really important, and it's more challenging as people don't have as much access to the river. And I'll just keep rambling without a moderator. I can go all day.
You have 1 minute left.
Okay. So I'm sort of all over the place with that too, but I think that the concerns that I have for the river going forward are, again, access to the river, and also our antiquated and very odd water law in California, where it's the first come, first serve. lots of straws in the river, and some of them are legal and some of them are not, and it's just not well managed between the river and the additional seasonal runoff because of all the hardscaping throughout the valley. The water doesn't have as much opportunity to sink down and recharge through the ground, that nice cool water that we all need in the summer. And then still pollutants that are going into the river, aging septic. We have a septic system or a sewage treatment plant in St. Helena and Calistoga that are failing now because we haven't really wanted to invest in keeping our infrastructure going. So it's a big concern for the river as well.
Do you want to go? I think for this one we can each take a stab at it. We have 5 minutes to get deep into it. If you want.
No problem. Well, okay, so I'm up in the hills, and what I see, not all the time, but every time there's a nice big ground-soaking rain, the various engineered erosion control plans fail. They have those laterals that are the perforated, pipes. They might be 4-inch, that squiggly stuff, or the steel stuff that are supposed to distribute the water out so it doesn't just gorge down. Well, guess what? 90% of the water comes out right when the down pipe comes in there, and it all gushes out there and goes down maybe 10, 20, 30 feet through a self-made ravine to the gutter and on down its merry way. And what color is it? Well, up in my area, it's usually red. The vineyard designers and everybody else say, oh, we got to do all this stuff and make it right. Well, they do a lot of stuff, but they don't make it right. And it also seems that they don't change it when they know that it fails. Those lateral things, it's like a leach line. It's got to be level, right? Otherwise it dumps out down. So the deforestation that's going on up in my area is just amazing. Big blocks of conifers have been cut down, and this hasn't just been recently. This started probably in the early 80s out around the Los Posadas. Turn me off. Battery?
No, it's just there's a mute button on the bottom. If you touch it, it
Okay. So around the Los Posadas forest, and there are a lot of other examples that go on. So the sediment, somebody threw at me over the last year a figure that there's 14 tons of sediment that gets carried into the streams per acre. Well, I say to myself, well, okay, what's 14 tons really mean? Well, believe it or not, it's about 1/10 of an inch of topsoil makes 14 tons of material per acre. And I said, well, gee, wow. So I've got a vineyard that I've leased for a long time, and we put in some 4-inch pipes around the well so nobody will knock over the well, and then cemented those in. And those were cemented at ground level, like this table. So now that concrete is about this high above the ground. And this is not a steep area. This is an area that you would say was relatively flat, but it's lost that much. And these were put in, I don't know, I'm guessing 25 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. But so 1/10 of an inch per year of erosion seems like an incredible amount, and it obviously is if it's 14 tons per acre.
Wow, thank you, Randy. So let's see, challenges. what I'm going to attempt to do is connect this to social justice, and in some sense, it's inescapably tied to institutionalized racism too. So forgive me, I usually tell stories in a circle and try to connect it at the end. I'm just like water. It's a water symposium. Sometimes we don't know how the watersheds are connected, but there's a link. So, water insecurity created one by what Sherry mentioned, which is the destruction of our water ecosystem over decades and centuries, and then the current deforestation. Like, this creates water insecurity that ends up being rent insecurity, and it's a type of gentrification that's driven by the forces that were mentioned. Here's an example. I have a friend in Santa Elena. She wasn't documented. She just became a resident. She's almost going to be a citizen. Her parents are undocumented. They should be retired, but there is no retirement plan. So they have to kind of keep trying to make ends meet until they leave this world and rely on their children, right? Their water was increased significantly by an apartment complex. That's another misconception. Oh, apartment, I don't own a house, so if the water goes up, it's not going to affect me. No, it does affect apartments too, because then the landlord will act accordingly based on how much the water increases for him. And the parents of my friend, who are in their elderly age, had to move out because they could no longer pay rent. And they also, they were too proud to ask for a lot of help, right? So they wanted to be able to be self-sufficient. So on the one hand, it's shaming for them not to be able to afford to rent a place. So that's one issue right there, is that we have to remember that not everybody can pay the true cost of water. One, because we've been accustomed to devalue the true price of water, but also because we have people who are in disenfranchised and disempowered positions. But what creates disenfranchised, disempowered, unjust, and, if I may say so, even racist forces that create these inequalities? Well, it goes back to dishonoring and damaging our watersheds. So raise your hand if you're familiar with the 8-hour workday. Okay, if you don't. Okay, or raise your hand if you have had an 8-hour workday. Okay, raise your hand if you've worked more than 8 hours and got overtime pay. Okay, so we may already be aware of this, but there are overtime pay exceptions for farm workers and originally also for domestic house workers. It's a nice way of saying almost servants. So everybody here who's not a farm worker after 8 hours, unless you have a special deal with your company, you get overtime pay. So we work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, right? If you're a farm worker, what my dad, my brother, my cousins, a huge amount of uncles and aunts do is 10 hours, right? 60 hours per week. So Monday through Saturday is what I grew up seeing my dad and family do, never realizing that it only applies to them. And it also applies to domestic house workers, though that policy has been changing. And the reason is because this policy was created so that ex-plantation owners from the south of the US, ex-slave owners, could further exploit the post-Jim Crow, post-sharecropping system that was designed to keep slaves dependent on the property owner. So saying that they want to exclude farm workers from equal overtime pay and from the labor reforms that were applied to everybody is code for saying, let us exploit these people, because farm workers used to be African American people before it changed from black to brown. And so were domestic house workers. So this policy is what has allowed companies to externalize the cost of production so that they can maximize and grow more, because they're not paying the true cost of water or labor. And that's why I would argue we are seeing, especially corporate wines, Constellation wines, etc., and even local small family-owned wines who maybe didn't know any better, using an institutionally, historically racist system to further damage the water, which in turn damages the people that they're also exploiting, sometimes inadvertently, sometimes knowing very well that they're being exploited, by creating housing insecurity as well. So that's one challenge. I don't know if I could connect that, but I tried. So the next question is, well, how can we address some of these issues? What are creative or innovative solutions that can address some of the topics we mentioned or any other related watershed issue? Does anybody want to take the first stab at it?
While you're thinking, I'll fill up your time. No, well, in the vineyards, everybody has almost all converted to drip irrigation, but you know, that's a bad joke. It's a good drop in the bucket. The real issues I see start up in the hills, where the trees are, where the conifers are in my case. I just lost a thought. Go.
It's all good. It happens to all of us. So there's a lot, there's stuff out there like gray water, recycle this. I'm going to go back to my theme of I really want to be a voice for farm worker, immigrant family, the diaspora of workers that I come from. I usually see even my own community looking for the Western world for solutions, or sometimes we look to indigenous people for solutions. And sometimes we also can look at the same immigrants who already have solutions, because many of us, at least in my personal experience, come from places where our water was damaged, and we come from places that, due through ecological and financial things, free trade agreements, etc., were being pushed to be displaced and also searching for a better place. So I had come from a place where we only use water, we get water 2 hours per day. So that was normalized for me. It was strange to come to a country where you have water free range to use as much water as you want as a house and then for a business, etc. So we had gray water systems, but I didn't even know that was a thing. That was just the common sense thing to do. Is when we washed our dishes, we just walked up the hill, if we lived in a hill, or to your backyard, and you had a concrete slab to wash your clothes and dishes, and the pipe just went into a patch of grass and shrubs and flowers. So that was actually a filtration system for our gray water. So gray water is one creative solution we can apply in mass, scale it up for all our vineyards. We have a cultural paradigm to break through, because we still have that association with water being nasty if it's gray water. But I think that in gray water, we can, and other solutions are out there that we can also look to the global south for solutions for poor countries that have been historically even occupied, have had coup d'etats, or have just had, after colonization, like where I came from, indigenous people are very poor in the southern part of Mexico, as we've had to find creative solutions. And I'll wrap it up by saying that in Oaxaca, where I come from, we've had to telecommunications companies, like native people here in California, we don't have cell phones in some areas or telephones because companies or the government doesn't think it's worth providing services. So we just have pitched in other neighboring communities and just built our own cell phone tower, and then it's essentially free texting that only works for the community. But well, that's all we need, really. If you need to make a call to your loved one in the U.S., well, you can just go to a special place. And then we've had to build our own water pumps. In some cases, we're putting solar power to feed a village's water, and sometimes that money comes from workers from here. So I'm only mentioning 2 examples, but I think there's room for us to explore, but we can't explore those if we don't have bridges to reach out to that community. Because James Conaway couldn't answer that question, and neither could many of you or I, right? It's hard, like how do you make those bridges? So to find the chest of solutions that I think people of color and immigrants and others have, well, you have to build a bridge. So before we get to that, we need to be bilingual, we need to host people so they can come to places like this for this watershed symposium and future ones, because they do care and we do care, we just have some barriers to overcome.
think Julio makes a really good point about it's sort of the disconnection from water too. When you just turn on your tap and there it is, and you don't think about where that water came from or the massive journey that it's come to your sink, and then it goes down the drain. You don't think about where it goes either. And so I think education's really important, but there's nothing like having to get your own water and lug it to make you really appreciate how valuable it is. And because that's so prevalent in our culture, and because the Napa Valley is becomes so dependent on tourism and hotels, it's a massive drain on our water too. Probably, I don't know what the numbers are, but I know when people go to hotels, they're not necessarily thinking about water conservation, and especially if they're not from around here and they don't realize that water's precious. And I think a lot of Californians don't realize that. In Southern California is sort of the glaring poster child for wasting water, but I think we could all do a better job of that as well. But the Napa sanitation is doing more recycled water and trying to get that to be more socially acceptable to be used for farming. And I think that there's a lot of room for improvement there as well. And it's going to be really needed because the population's only growing. So we need to think more creatively about where our water comes from and how we can conserve every drop of it, and replacing leaking pipes underground. Again, a lot of it comes back to infrastructure, and that's expensive for a community to invest in the infrastructure. It's not glamorous to do underground pipes or replace a failing sewage system, but it is really important, and it would be great if it were higher up on the priority list of our elected officials.
Recycle. We have about a little over 5 minutes before we open to Q&A. Another thought occurred to me, but I don't want to be a what do you call it? A microphone hog? Microphone hog? Yeah. In Spanish you say, did the airplane come back to your head? Like, so, okay, so in the hangar, the flight is in the hangar. So, this is an idea that occurred to me somewhat recently, and that's that I went to a significant amount of Hispanic people, not all of them, but go to Catholic churches. So that was a strategic place for me to go announce things related to water from last year. And I saw that people actually showed up, and they did care. They couldn't stay for the whole time because they had to wake up really early to work 10 hours a day, 60 hours per day the next work week. But they cared, and in some cases, they could relate to back home. So, for example, there's, someone mentioned measured C, so I don't want to talk about measured C. What I want to talk about is there's the whole 3 to 1 ratio. I was reading that policy, and my dad said, oh, yeah, well, that's what we had to do back in our town. Like, I had to cut a tree down, and then the municipal government people said, oh, yeah, now you have to give us 3 baby trees, or plant one that's like guaranteed to grow. So that was like, okay, well, that's just common sense for him. So I think one innovative solution to address watershed problems is to build the bridges that amongst communities, because all of you out there who are working on water policy and protection can't do it alone. You need the help of the rest of the people who live and work here. So if we could sponsor water protectors from Michoacan, identify the main hubs of immigrants as Michoacan and Jalisco are the 2 main in here. And there's specific towns like El Llano in Jalisco, where you can bring water protectors or even an elected official who cares about this. And because we do this all the time, we're always sending money and bringing guests for cultural events. We bring our government officials, our mayors, and when they come, you're kind of expected to come and greet them because we're binational beings. Whether you're documented or not, that's part of our identity, is we're always going back and forth in some way. So I think that could be one solution is for future water symposiums or events is have a panel that's fully in Spanish, and you have the guy from Michoacan and Jalisco held at the place that's more culturally relevant. And I think it might create some interesting waves of interest, because we're not just, some of us like myself, we're not just trying to protect the water here. We have 2 homes because my parents ideally want to go back there to retire when they're old and leave us here. So we have an interest in being dual I'm a dual citizenship, and I would also love to be a dual water protector and unleash like all the tools we can use for that. Oh, so that's like a clap, by the way. It's not this. It's disrespectful in other cultures. It's like, hey, speed it up. You're talking too much. So I think that was the intention of the question. So do our panelists want to say any closing statements?
My question for you all is, how do we reach people who are not already in the choir? Like, a lot of people do conserve water and are, responsible and are interested in what's going on in the watershed and do their part to try to restore land if they have it, plant native plants in their garden. But how do you reach the people who don't think that that's something that's important and interesting, and bring in more people, build more bridges across the board?
There is a lot of stuff going on statewide, and the tribes here in California just started interfacing. They've been very isolated from the main population, and that isolation has just ended this last 2 months. And what Catherine Sandoval was talking about, her outreach representing the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, the biggest use of electricity and water are the energy companies, and the biggest use of water is the generation of electricity. The biggest use of electricity is the storage and transportation of water. So that's what she calls the nexus of power. And breaking that nexus is a really important thing that the state is already working on now. They actually have a deadline of 2020. And so it's important to know that. But also the tribes have been trying to interface with the state for, since the state became a state, for 200 years. But now the state finally responded. And 2 years ago, the governor of the state mandated that all the state agencies have to have consulting policies with the tribes, which is just starting to happen, because you can make a policy and then it takes a while for it to kick in. And the tribes do not want to be hired to consult. They want to do the work themselves. They said, we manage this state, this region for over 50,000, 60,000 years. You guys have had it for about 200 years and haven't done a very good job. And so what the tribes and the tribal councils of California are asking is to get that job back, that they be allowed to move off the reservations where they are, mandated, like concentration camps. They usually get killed or arrested if they leave them. But they're wanting to be free to move about and to be hired to do the work of managing the state. And the water was managed. The water was managed along with the land. And that's what you missed that discussion earlier, just the burns and fire. That actually keeps the willow and stuff from clogging up the waterways. And I know that the Napa River, when I moved here in 1972, you could swim in it up in Yountville, and you can't anymore. The water's not there to swim in. And if you go up to, the biggest water reservoir for Napa City, it's the water's down 7 feet. And so the drought's not over. But I think it's an opportunity. The opportunity is to start interfacing very actively with the 112 tribes in the state of California, as well as getting transcultural, references here. I think those are all really good opportunities for connecting back to the original caretakers of this land.
When St. Helena went into drought restrictions, this was in 2014, and asked the citizens to conserve 25% of the water, use 25% less, what was not announced was that the city of St. Helena depends upon the revenue from selling the water to run the water system. So 2 years later, we found out that our water revenues were down from $4.9 million a year to $4.2 million a year. So that's $700,000 less to maintain the system. So they raised the rates for the residents, which was a tremendous surprise. And for some of the residents, some of the fixed income residents, it went up about 100%. We were able to, with the new council, push that back down. But it brings up this question, this issue, that when we ask people to conserve, we have to remember that a municipality or a water department makes its money selling water as a commodity. And a municipality can't make money on it. It just needs to make enough money to run its system. So when we push for conservation, we have to start thinking about how then are we going to fund the actual system. And this is this is where we are now. And luckily in St. Helena, we have some engineering firms that are coming in, and we're going to be really asking these questions. But these are questions that hit all over the state when the drought came, and there are other communities that got hit with the same problem. We did so well as a community saving water that we actually damaged our system. So we're at a point now where we all have to think about this, and the next time we're asked to conserve, put your hand up and say there's another element that has to be considered for the long-term health of our system. So that's just one thing that we found out the hard way, and now we're trying to get it fixed before the next drought.
The Napa River still listed, 303D listed as an impaired waterway by the Clean Water Act for sediment, nutrients, and pathogens. I understand there's some movement over one of those that may be improved. Yet at the same time, the Regional Water Quality Control Board has mandated new discharge requirements on Sonoma and Napa counties. I know that we've cleaned it up down south, or let the swamp come back in south of Napa, and we've cleaned up areas along the Rutherford Reach area. What is your take on what's really happening to the river? Are the fish coming back? Are they coming back in a meaningful way? And if so, why is the state having to step in and do what we should be doing locally?
So many good things are happening, and there are, at the same time, there are negative things that are happening. It's kind of balancing out to some degree, but the fish are hanging in there. The drought has been a big factor for the fish populations, the anadromous fish in particular. That's had a toll. And then things that are going on in the ocean too, with the changes in the ocean currents and the food availability for the salmon and steelhead in the ocean is another factor. So it makes it difficult to nail down exactly why the fish aren't coming back more substantially than they are. I mean, it is encouraging that we have salmon in the river again. We didn't for about 60 years, and it's good to have at least some Chinook that have wandered back into the system. My personal take on it is that a lot of the restoration that we have done in the Rutherford Reach and now in the nodes in the Oakville to Oak Knoll Reach is creating some nice diversity in the channel. So the fish that are in the system are less likely to get blasted out in a big rain event. There's more food available for the fish in the river. And then having the beaver back in the river has been actually really, I think, really important as well. It's caused the water table to raise up in the places where there are beaver dams, and created some more diversity in the channel as well, where the young can hang on through the dry periods and until the river otters get them. But to me, I feel like this is a really optimistic time because we are seeing some of these things return to the system. You're seeing a lot more waterfowl returning. I don't know what the count is on otters, but otters eat fish, and so it's a good sign that we're getting lots of otters in the river. And I also am not up on the latest for the rotary screw trap that the RCD has in the river, but I know that they've been catching some great anadromous fish, including the lamprey, which is, I think it's really encouraging that we have lamprey in the river. It's one of the few systems where our lamprey are still, we have a pretty substantial population. So I think, again, like the fact that our attitudes about the river are changing and there's a lot more awareness. There's more awareness about having a vegetated buffer strip and having riparian forests along the rivers to create shade. And for a long time, it was just general policy that all the large woody debris would get pulled out of the river. People would do it themselves with their bulldozers, their heavy equipment on their farms, and until pretty recently. And people still call the flood district and say, hey, there's a tree in the river, it needs to come out. But it's actually really important to have those large trees and boulders and things in the river for the sake of the salmon and the steelhead. So we're learning slowly. And I think we're seeing that the river is really responding to the positive changes that have been made so far. But it is true, as Charlie said, there's less water in the river, partly because it's the rivers in size so much, and partly because there's so many straws sucking out the water, for lots of reasons. But that's definitely a problem for our fish. And then the river's actually been starved for gravel and larger rock. So yeah, a lot of gravel was removed from the river for decades and decades. It's all in San Francisco mostly, road base and whatnot. But because of the changes in the dynamics and the culverts and everything else, there are places where there are lots and lots of rocks that are stockpiled in the creeks, but they're not making it into the main stem of the river. So there are just a lot of, as we understand more, we also understand more what the problems are. That there are more problems than maybe we thought, because we just didn't even know what the problems were. Now we're starting to understand the problems and starting to think more creatively about how to fix them. I feel like the whole Measure A Living River Flood Control Project and the restoration that has been successfully implemented sets a really encouraging precedence, and it's really innovative and hopeful. I think it's catching on in other places around the state as well to use more natural processes to do this kind of restoration work. It's just a question of, like I said, there's so many other factors too for the steelhead and salmon in particular in the oceans, and with the variable weather patterns and drought and flashy storms and things. It's really, the deck's kind of stacked against a lot of all of us, really.
I just want to mention that I think we need to get more youth involved intentionally. So creating intentional opportunities for our youth to be involved in these type of conversations, whether it be through paid and unpaid internships for engineering, science, or even political internships for them. I think that would be of great value, and they're the ones that are going to be tackling these things in the future. And if we could get them involved now and energized and talking about these things, there are engineers and scientists and politicians of the future. So I feel like we need to intentionally create those opportunities for them, whether it be paid or unpaid. Unfortunately, a lot of our students, especially those with lower resources, are going to seek those paid opportunities, obviously, but we definitely need to create those opportunities for our students, our youth, our high school students, middle school students, our community college students, to get involved in the conversation. I'm just thinking about creative ways to help tackle this problem and get more people involved, and I think that's one way to do it.
You're absolutely right. I agree 100%. We need to get the young people, college age, and all across the board. We've been working with the RCD, the Friends of the Napa River, have a group, Napa Youth Stewardship Council. We take high school students who are interested in doing service learning projects, and try to present them with opportunities to engage in various aspects of environmental work, and also to reach out to the community. We have a hike on Saturday that they're guiding over in the Westwood Hills Park, and trying to get more of the community out there, and the kids are going to lead the hike and try to engage people.
There's a very interesting letter to the EPA that is just, I've had it for a couple of weeks now, about the role of Roundup in the aquatic system, and basically challenging the EPA to not further license the use of it. It's a really neat letter written by a fish biologist that hangs out up in the Eel River. You might know him, Pat Higgins. Yeah, something to watch for. And at Dunn Vineyards, we have 6 full-time employees. They all have full medical coverage and retirement.
So we're going to break up into little teams, and that's how we're going to end the day today, okay? This group, report back. Chris?
We had lots of ideas. Okay, the first idea is that Rich Bruns, did I say it right, is going to take a photo of the Napa Valley College Pond, which is the duck pond where everybody goes to feed the ducks, and its feeding creek, which is a mess right now, and share that out on Facebook, and with an encouragement to clean it up, encouraging the college to help facilitate this, and we're all going to share it out. Our second idea is for me to contact other middle school teachers about a project that I just developed, which is teaching a class on how to write an initiative, as well as giving them projects in the watershed to write the initiatives about. And then we wanted to, and then we talked about participating in classroom activities and encouraging our kids that we know in other classrooms to join the Acorns to Oaks project. Also taking kids that we know for walks along the river or streams and asking them questions about it, so making it more an educational opportunity, and having them take photos on cell phones so that they can share those photos and become more involved. Those were our ideas for the next 3 days.
And we talked about a variety of things. I think there were more specific, which is great. I think we're a little bit more hypothetical in some ways, but things that could be done in a few days that are being done. And it's mostly around awareness. So the first one is creating an awareness of the idea of one water. That idea and spreading that idea organically through our networks over time. Not just one person doing it, but as a group doing that over the next few days and more, as it's saying there. Another one is start to recruit students to work on testing the water and the soil in different parts of the river to see what's in it and making people aware of that. So those are definitely some projects that could be done over a few days. Not that they will be done in the next 3 days, but that's something that, for example, over the summer that may be able to be done. And another one was around awareness on really preparing for the future. But I think I'm going to pass this one on to explain it a little bit better. So Tom, going to explain it a little bit better.
Oh, sure. And it's good to get youth involved in type of discussions that I've been familiar with professionally for many, many years, and that is it is one water after all. It is a cyclical process, and when you're dealing with civil engineers, often it's just a matter of transporting water as a commodity from one destination to another, and how it's done often is in what is referred to as the joint trench, which is a very growth-inducing way of conveying water, as well as power, communication systems. In other words, if they have to go to all the trouble of opening up a trench to put the utility into it, they're going to want to put all the other utilities into it and stub out for those utilities as they go along. That in itself, the stubbing out, is the growth-inducing characteristic of that concept. So that sort of hinges right on the getting used to understanding that these resources are limited, but they are cyclical. They are one, as in one water, and not just a problem solving on paper. So you don't have to dig up a trench again to install another utility. And putting it all into one trench at one time is growth-inducing, and that's the other thing that we're up against in California, is growth-inducing projects that are carried way out into the countryside and beyond.
And there was one more that we talked about as well, and that's the traditional ecological knowledge that is there, being able to maybe list out some bullet points of some of the main points around water, and being able to spread that so more people understand ways that we could conserve more water and take care of our water together as well.
Thank you, Luis and Tony, right? Yeah. Okay, so we have one more group to report back.
Thank you, Chris. Sherry and I and Craig, Julio, and Sal talked about what we could do the next 3 days, and I think we decided to dedicate our response to gratitude, and we're going to thank the students who presented to us for teaching us today, but we decided also to thank Craig and Luis for your efforts. And then beyond your efforts, I guess the good fortune we have that we're thankful for is your commitment to respond for their sake and for ours, and for the relationships that we have with the earth and with one another. And then we were also thankful for our good fortune of having you recently hired, 2 months ago, and Craig maybe a couple years ago. And how did that come about? Well, apparently you have some bosses. You share a boss, and we would like to thank your bosses for their leadership, and say creating the conditions for you to articulate out into the community, your desire for a better place here. And so we're very thankful, and we're going to do that in the next few days.
So that last thing we're going to do for today, we're going to close this water symposium similar to how we started, by acknowledging the continuing presence of indigenous people's songs, traditions, and cultures. So one more time, Suscol Intertribal Council will help us close the day now.